there! Welcome to Cinema Rolls, your one-stop channel for fascinating in-depth movie comparisons. I'm your host Basha, and we've got something really exciting in store for you today. We're going to be taking a look at the male midlife crisis as embodied by the two aging psychiatrists in the movies Equus and Don Juan De Marco. We'll compare the movies to see how each of the psychiatrists deals with a new young male patient struggling through a crisis of youth and what impact this has on the psychiatrists themselves. And, as always, I'm really looking forward to reading about your thoughts in the comments. Now, let's get started. Equus, based on the play by Peter Shaffer, came out in 1977 and stars Richard Burton as the psychiatrist Dr. Dysart, with Peter Firth as his young patient Alan Strang. Don Juan De Marco was released nearly 20 years later in 1994. It stars Marlon Brando as the psychiatrist Dr. Jack Mickler, Johnny Depp as his young patient, Don Juan De Marco, and Faye Dunaway as Dr. Mickler's wife. We already see some differences in how these doctors come to take on their new cases. In Equus, a colleague asked Dr. Dysart to take on the case of a deeply disturbed young man named Alan Strang, who has inexplicably blinded 6 horses in an unprecedented act of violence. It takes some persuasion to get him to agree to take the case on, partly because of his workload and partly because he's about to take a leave of absence. And it seems that he really needs that leave because his heart doesn't seem to be in his job anymore, as we can see by his inner dialogue when his colleague brings the case to him.
One more dented little face, one more adolescent freak, the usual unusual.
But his colleague insists.
Martin, you've simply got to take him here.
Before you say anything else, I can take no more patients at the moment.
You must.
Now, why?
Because there's no one else within 100 miles of that desk who can handle him and perhaps understand what this is all about.
He finally does agree, and in retrospect, he seems to feel that this challenge was just what he needed. And this is where we start to get the feeling that he had already been questioning his own life, both personally and professionally, before this patient came along.
What is he but a last straw, a last symbol? I was ripe for the confrontation.
In stark contrast, Jack Mickler, the psychiatrist in Don Juan De Marco, seems rather eager to take on this unusual case. We see the young man high above a gathering crowd in the city as he prepares to leap to his death from the top of a billboard, dressed as the famous Latin lover, Don Juan, and proclaiming that he has made love to over 1,000 women. This is where Dr. Jack Mickler comes in.
Jack asks the police officer on duty what's up with the costume. The officer responds sarcastically that he claims to be Don Juan and wants to end his life gloriously, adding that he's asked them to send their finest swordsman to do battle with him, preferably Don Francisco da Silva.
Jack's mission is to bring the young man down alive.
Where is Don Francisco de Silva? I will fight none other.
Jack figures the best way to get the guy down is to join in on his illusion.
I am his uncle, Don Octavio de Flores.
But Don Juan wishes to die only by the sword of Don Francisco da Silva. So, the good doctor tries another approach. He asks why, with so many amorous successes, the great Don Juan would wish to end his life.
Because there is nothing left to live for. My Doñana is everything.
In an attempt to engage the young man and keep him from jumping, he asked him to tell him about Doñana.
Have you never met a woman who inspires you to love? You see your unborn children in her eyes. Your life begins with her, and without her, it must surely end.
And I think this is where Jack's fascination with Don Juan begins. So, later at the psychiatric hospital, when they're allocating patients, he volunteers to take him on, but his supervisor objects.
Are you not retiring?
Of course I'm retiring, but I think this make a hell of a swan song.
We all know that retirement itself can be a crisis in anyone's life, especially for someone whose entire self-worth is tied up in their profession. It's a time for questioning what life is all about, and that gives us the perfect setup for what eventually unfolds. Both of our psychiatrists are confronted with some unusual challenges in trying to get to know their patients. In fact, Dr. Dysart in Equus doesn't get very far at first.
And you're 17, is that right?
Double your pleasure, double your fun with double good, double mint gum.
You live with your parents and your father's a printer. What sort of things does he print?
Try the taste of martini, the most beautiful drink in the world.
And that's about as far as he gets. Jack Mickler, however, does manage to elicit more conversation from his young patient, but it doesn't quite go the way he expected. It all starts when he offers Don Juan some pills to help with his delusions.
Then I am afraid we must take these pills together, because you are severely deluded.
Well, what delusions have I got?
This fantasy that you are some Dr. Mickler. I'm very disappointed in you, Don Octavio. I am not deluded. I am Don Juan. And if you will not medicate me for these 10 days, I will prove it to you.
Both men do finally get their patients to open up to them a bit about their stories, and this starts to give us some insights, at least into their emotional states regarding their individual obsessions. At first, Dysart's patient is still answering his questions with jingles, but this time Dysart isn't having it, and he orders Alan back to his room. So Alan relents and tells Dysart about his first encounter with a horse at the age of 6. He was at the beach with his parents when a stranger came up to him on horseback.
You want to come up? Don't be frightened, huh? Just hold on tight to his mane and grip with your knees. Want to go faster? All you have to do is say, "Come on, Trojan, bear me away."
You can see that Alan is absolutely enraptured riding that horse. But when his father sees that a complete stranger has put his son on a horse, things get ugly.
Hey you! What is my son doing up there? Don't you think you should ask permission before doing a stupid thing like that?
It's lovely, Dad.
How dare you pick up children and put them on dangerous animals?
Greg, the boy's hurt.
I'm not.
So perhaps for the first time in his young life, Alan found something that really gave him joy, only to have his father take it away. Albeit well-intentioned and perhaps justified, his father's anger sapped all the pleasure out of the day and left Alan with a longing that he was unable to quench. But his fascination with horses never left him. When he was older, he got a job in a stable, and although riding was one of the perks of the job, he told the owner he didn't even want to ride the horses. He just wanted to work there and be around them. I can relate. I've mucked out a lot of horse stalls in my time, and I didn't care to ride either. Just preparing a nice, clean environment for them to live in was reward enough for me. If you've ever done it, you know what I mean. But Alan takes it a little bit farther. It seems like he almost wants to be one of them. Meanwhile, Don Juan tells of another kind of awakening.
By the time I was 10, the attraction that females had for me was becoming of some concern to my mother. She presented me to God and asked the Lord to save me before it was too late. By the time I was 12, I understood the obligation the Lord spoke of to share one's blessings with those less fortunate.
Unfortunately, the first woman that he eventually blessed happened to be married.
Don Alfonso was humiliated that he had been cuckolded by a 16-year-old boy. So to retaliate, he announced publicly that he and my mother had been having an affair for many years.
Plot thickens.
My father was quick to defend my mother's virtue.
As you would expect, because Don Juan has painted such picture of the legendary romance and enduring love that his parents shared.
I have no doubt my father would have easily prevailed, were it not for one fatal mistake. He looked up at my mother's eyes, and it was too late. And so it was that my father, the great swordsman, died in my mother's arms as our tears fell upon him. You have killed my father. Now you must kill me.
Wow, what a thing to have to live with. As a way of atoning for having set the ball in motion for the events of that fateful day, he donned a mask and vowed never to take it off for the rest of his life. And in the wake of his father's death, his mother sent him on an ocean voyage to purify his soul, while she herself entered a convent and became a nun. He adds that during his travels, he was sold into slavery in a sultan's harem where, unbeknownst to the sultan himself, he was made to dress like a woman and service one of the sultan's many wives. At first he refused, because he didn't want to betray his one true love, Doña Julia. But he learned that a man can love more than one woman, and he pleasured the sultana by day and spent his nights in the harem with the sultan's other 1,500 wives. Eventually, he grew weary of always having to be on guard against discovery by the sultan, and so he made his escape by sea once again. Well, if we weren't convinced before that Don Juan was living in a fantasy world, I think we're starting to lean in that direction now. Meanwhile, back in England, Dysart pays a visit to Alan's parents to see if he can gather more insights into what was behind Alan's violent attack on the horses.
It's all so unbelievable. Alan was always such a gentle boy. And he loves animals, especially horses.
And then Mrs. Strang starts quoting passages about horses from the book of Job as she takes him up to Alan's bedroom to show him a picture of a horse that Alan has there. She mentions that he'd previously had an admittedly gruesome picture of Christ on the road to Calvary in the same spot, but that her husband had objected and torn it down. Alan had been inconsolable until he'd been able to replace it with this equally grim picture of a horse. So here we start to see that there may be quasi-religious overtones to Alan's obsession with horses. When he's deprived of his God, he replaces it with a horse. And I think it's important to note that this is the second time we hear of Alan's father taking away something that meant a great deal to Alan. Just then, Strang arrives home from work, and we get a first-hand glimpse of the marital tension around the issue of religion.
I can't say I entirely approve. Especially when I hear her reading that Bible to him.
You mean she's religious?
Some might say excessively so. Bloody religion. Call it what you like, all that stuff to me is just bad sex.
This prompts Dysart to ask whether Alan has had any sex education. His father admits that he's never spoken to the boy about it, but his mother has provided him with the biological facts. And
But I also told him what I believed. That sex is not just a biological matter, but a spiritual one as well.
So here we begin to see a possible melding of the sexual with the spiritual. In fact, both of the parents make this association, but in very opposite ways. And in hopes of learning more about what drives Alan's obsession with horses, Dysart gives him a tape recorder to talk into, thinking that he'll feel more comfortable relating intimate details in that way. Alan starts out by revisiting that first ride on the horse when he was 6.
It was sexy. That's what you want to know, isn't it? I was pushed forward on the horse. There was sweat on my legs from his neck. His sides were all warm, and a smell, and turning him. All that power going anywhere you wanted.
And as he matured, his admiration for horses came to take on a much larger meaning.
They could stamp us into bits any time they wanted, and they don't. They give us all their strength, and they'll gallop till they die. If we don't say stop, they live for us their whole lives.
This brings to mind the two pictures in Alan's room. Jesus, the man-god who sacrificed his life for the salvation of mankind, and Equus, the horse-god, who sacrifices his own kind for man on a daily basis. Or at least that's how Alan thinks of it. The religious overtones of Alan's obsession are confirmed in a later meeting where Alan's father tells Dysart about something he overheard coming from Alan's room one night.
And Prancus begat Flancus, and Flancus begat Spancus, and Equus begat Fleckus, the king of Spit. And Fleckus spoke out of his chinkle-chankle, and he said, Behold, I give you Equus, my only begotten son.
So it would seem that Alan integrates both the Old and New Testament into his custom-made religion. Makes me wonder if the inherent conflict between the two testaments might be another source of inner conflict for the boy. And then, always on the lookout for parallels, I wondered if Don Juan had a god, and if so, who might that be?
There are only 4 questions of value in life, Don Octavio. What is sacred? Of what is the spirit made? What is worth living for? And what is worth dying for? The answer to each is the same, only love.
But of course, the God of love. That seems more in keeping with the New Testament if you want to stick with the Christian analogy, but I rather tend to think that Don Juan is more of a kindred spirit with Eros, the Greek god of love, don't you? When Jack's supervisor informs him that Don Juan lives with his grandmother in Queens and has never lived in Mexico as he claimed, Jack pays a visit to the grandmother.
Donna Anna. She's all he talks about. The boy's convinced he's found his one true love.
At his next meeting with Don Juan, he confronts him with some of the truths that his grandmother shared with him, such as the fact that he grew up in Phoenix, Arizona, and his father worked at a dry cleaner's and was killed in a car crash in Phoenix and not in a swashbuckling duel in Mexico. Then he notices the magazine that Don Juan is holding and tells him a story about a young man he once treated who fell in love with a girl in a poster.
And he was very insecure about women. And they tried to contact her. Oh, he must have called the magazine 100 times.
Someone finally gave him her number and he called her. The conversation was very short. She basically told him to buzz off.
And then what happened?
What happened next? He tried to kill himself. What happened?
Doña Ana is real, Don Octavio.
We can see that both these young men are driven by a very specific passion. Alan for horses and Don Juan for his one true love, Doña Ana. And both of the psychiatrists start to be affected by the passions of their patients right from the very beginning. Dysart tells of a dream he had shortly after meeting Alan.
I'm a chief priest in Homeric Greece. I'm wearing a wide gold mask, all noble and bearded.
He describes having to sacrifice children to ensure the success of the crop in the military campaign. He's starting to get nauseated by it, but doesn't dare let the other priests sense his doubts about the virtue of this work, because then they would kill him.
And then, of course, the damn mask begins to slip.
This motif of the mask is picked up in Don Juan De Marco as well.
Your people have taken my mask, Don Octavio. Well, think how you would feel if you were made to take off this mask that you are wearing.
What mask might that be? The mask of the psychiatrist who has all the answers? Or the mask of the man who is no longer in the spring of his youth and has all but abandoned any passions he may once have had?
I've been thinking about our adolescence. I just feel as though we surrendered our lives to the momentum of mediocrity.
Is he just talking about his marriage?
What happened to all the celestial fire that used to light our way?
Or is there something more?
And what am I going to retire from? Life? I've been treating this kid lately.
And so who is he really?
I don't know. He's getting to me.
I almost get the feeling that she might be asking him, or he might be asking himself, who are you really? After all, that's a question he's going to have to face once he's no longer occupied with his professional role. And what about Dr. Dysart's mask?
The thing is, I'm wearing that horse's head myself. This particular one, this huge, implacable head, is the most alarming yet. It asks questions I've avoided all my professional life. A horse's head is finally unknowable to me. Yet I handle children's heads. In a way, it has nothing to do with this boy. The doubts have been there for years.
What sort of doubt?
What am I trying to do to him?
Restore him.
To what?
A normal life.
But what view is Dysart beginning to take of normal life?
The normal is the good smile in a child's eyes. It is also the dead stare in a million adults. The normal is the indispensable, murderous god of health. And I am his priest.
Now the meaning of his dream is becoming clear, and his guilt is beginning to manifest.
I have honestly assisted children in this room, but beyond question, I have cut from them portions of individuality repugnant to this god normal.
Jack Mickler, too, in his own way, is struggling with the concept of normalcy in his profession. While he's finding himself caught up in the allure of Don Juan's fantasy life, his boss is putting more pressure on him to medicate his patients.
If I give him medication, Paul, I'm never going to get into this world that he's in, and it's a wonderful world.
Clearly, he's been seduced by Don Juan's tale of love and romance. Has he lost the plot completely?
You want to drive this kid nuts? Fill him full of antipsychotic chemicals, and you're going to have a nutcase that you are not ever going to forget for the rest of your life.
But his boss insists.
Telling you, Jack, he is a schizophrenic. He is not Don Juan.
How do you know he's not?
Now, I don't believe for 1 minute that Jack has actually bought into Don Juan's fantasies, but maybe he's afraid of eradicating those aspects of individuality that may be repugnant to the god of normalcy, of plucking out the good smile from the child's eyes and replacing it with the dead stare of the normal, healthy adult. And I think he's beginning to understand the beauty of Don Juan's coping mechanism. In fact, he recognized this much earlier when he challenged his patient's assertion that he himself was not Dr. Mickler, but Don Octavio de Flores.
What would you say to someone that said to you, this is a psychiatric hospital and that I am your psychiatrist?
I would say that he has a rather limited and uncreative way of looking at the situation.
Don Juan adds that he does in fact understand that he's in a mental hospital and goes on to explain how it is that he can go on insisting that Jack is Don Octavio in spite of that.
By seeing beyond what is visible to the eye, because I am not limited by my eyesight.
He's beginning to sound quite sane if you think about it. And how does this philosophy extend to his romantic fantasies?
Women react to me the way that they do, Don Octavio, because they sense that I search out the beauty that dwells within them. And as for you, Don Octavio de Flores, you are a great lover like myself, even though you may have lost your way and your accent.
Don't you think that maybe, just maybe, Don Octavio is starting to remember and rekindle the passions of his youth, perhaps seeing a reflection of his younger self in the romantic tales of his young protege? By now, we understand where our psychiatrists are in their professional lives that makes them so vulnerable to the influence of their respective patients. They're both burned out from many years of intense work with their adolescent patients. Dysart is on the verge of taking a leave of absence because of it, and Jack is actually taking early retirement. But where are they in their personal lives, their marriages?
I see us in our wedding photograph. Dr. and Dr. Mac Brisk. We were brisk in our wooing, brisk in our wedding, brisk in our disappointment, and now there's a nice, brisk nothing.
Alan instinctively senses this emptiness in Dysart and lashes out at him when Dysart's questioning of his own love life cuts a little too close to the bone.
Do you fuck her? Bet you don't. I bet you never touch her. You've got no kids, have you? Is that because you don't fuck?
Alan's taunts are like salt in a wound that keeps festering, yet Dysart seems resigned to this emptiness. On the other hand, as we saw earlier, Jack has a more congenial and even loving relationship with his wife, but is it everything he would like it to be?
I take it you want to go upstairs.
What gives you that idea?
Well, you know, I have to go upstairs and I want to take my calcium so my bones don't break into little pieces. And of course my estrogen to convince my body that I'm still 23.
So, although Jack's marriage is orders of magnitude happier than the one Dysart describes, he still seems to be searching for something, and it's not hard to understand how he might regard Don Juan's confidences as a sort of treasure map to help him find what he's looking for in his own life. But like Alan, Don Juan is also a perceptive patient and proffers Jack a challenge of his own.
You think I don't know what's going on with you, Don Octavio, but I do. You need me for a transfusion. Because your own blood has turned to dust and clogged your heart. It is only in my world that you can breathe.
As he goes on, his words echo those of Dr. Dysart, speaking of the dead stare in the eyes of adults who have been sacrificed to the god of normalcy.
What is this thing that happens with age? Why does everyone want to pervert love and suck it bone dry of all its glory?
And then he tells Jack the story of how he met his Doña Ana on a tropical beach after his escape from the Sultana.
Her beauty was not made of shapes and forms, but shined from within like a star. One day, I asked her to be mine.
Seeing as she'll be spending the rest of her life with a masked man, she's curious as to what led to his vow never to take it off.
I related the sad tale of my Doña Julia, never guessing for a moment that my sweet Doña Ana believed I had saved myself for her as she had for me.
She takes the news with courage, asking only that he tell her how many others there have been.
This would have been a very good time for me to lie. But truth is a terrible habit.
The number is well over 1,000.
I could see that this was a sum substantially greater than the one she had in mind.
This is too much for her to bear, and so she leaves him there forever.
And so my adventures came to an end, and with them the chance that one day, like my father, I would die in the arms of the woman I loved.
This is a sad tale that led Don Juan to want to sacrifice his life on the bittersweet altar of love. But Don Juan's many tales of passion had already started stirring up changes in the way that Jack approached things with the love of his life.
What's the occasion?
You're the occasion.
And now that his retirement is drawing nearer, they discuss their plans for the future, and it seems that they were each harboring separate visions. Jack wants to take off for the skies, and she pretty much wants to stay where she is.
We need to be a flight of eagles.
I don't see myself in that picture.
That sobers him up rather quickly, and he realizes that he hasn't really included her in his plans, but he's quick to change his course.
I need to find out who you are. I want to know what your hopes and your dreams are. I got lost along the way while I was thinking about myself.
Thought you'd never ask.
Did you see the look of love on his face after 30-some-odd years of marriage? Kind of makes you wonder how Mrs. Dysart would have responded if her husband would have shown the same interest in her, doesn't it?
My wife doesn't understand me, Your Honor.
Do you understand her?
But Dysart remains wrapped up in his work and its impact on him. His wife doesn't even seem to be an afterthought in his day-to-day life. He's learned from the stable owner that Alan used to secretly take the horses out at night, so to find out more about that, he suggests hypnosis using the tapping of a pen as a signal, and once he's under, Alan begins to describe his bizarre midnight rituals. He and Equus stand before each other, naked on every level. They bow to each other. Then Alan puts the man bit into his mouth to bite on so it won't be over too fast. He feeds sugar to Equus, his last supper.
His flank is cool. His nostrils open for me. His eyes shine, they can see his eyes.
The mention of Equus's eyes brings him too far from his comfort zone, but Dysart encourages him to continue.
Go on.
Into my hands he commends himself, naked in his chinkle-chankle.
Now his communion with the horse is beginning to take on distinctly religious overtones, and continuing the ritual, he mounts the horse and begins to ride.
I'm raw! I'm raw! Do you feel my raw? Feel me on you? I want to be inside you. Bear me away!
Afterwards, he says, they always embrace. He showed me how he stands in the night, like a frozen tango dancer, inhaling the cold, sweet breath.
Dysart's envy of Alan's passion is palpable.
He lives 1 hour every 3 weeks, howling in a mist. With my body, I thee worship. Many men have less vital with their wives. But one thing I know for sure, that boy has known a passion more ferocious than I have known in any second of my life. That's what his stare has been saying to me all this time. At least I galloped. When did you?
His own life seems dreary in comparison.
I sit there night after night watching that woman knitting, a woman I haven't kissed in 6 years. And he stands for an hour in the dark, sucking the sweat off his god's hairy cheek. Then in the morning, I put away my books and go off to the hospital to treat him for insanity.
So not only is Dysart questioning the ethics of his treatment, but he also seems to be questioning the very definition of sanity itself. But determined to get to the bottom of what sent Alan over the edge and made him slay his own god, he conducts another hypnotherapy session. And because Alan's father had confided in him that he knew Alan had been with a girl that night, Dysart decides to start there.
It was a Saturday night. We were just closing up.
How would you like to take me out?
So, at Jill's suggestion, they go out to see a Swedish skin flick at a local cinema. And while they're there, Alan turns around and is shocked to see his father walk in. Mr. Strang notices Alan too and makes a scene, forcing him to leave the theater. So now that makes the third important thing that his father takes away from him. First the horse ride on the beach, then the picture of Jesus, and now his first date ever. The three of them have a very uncomfortable wait together at the bus station with a very angry Mr. Strang making up excuses about why he was there. And at the same time, it's another coming-of-age moment for Alan, who is seeing his father as human and fallible for the first time, because of course he could see through his excuses. So in a fourth and final blow, he strips away Alan's illusions. When the last bus arrives, Alan's father tells him to come along, but Alan insists on seeing Jill home. They have a long walk and end up back at the stable.
What's in your head?
Her eyes. I keep looking at them because I really want to...
To look at her breasts?
Yes.
Where do you go now? Into his temple. His holy of holies.
From there, one thing leads to another.
What did you do then?
I put it in her.
Yes?
I put it in her.
Dysart keeps pushing because he knows if he can get Alan to confront what happened that night, he'll get to the reason for his behavior and possibly allow him to let go of it.
Did you, Alan?
Yes!
Tell me the truth, Alan. Did you?
Fuck off!
Jack uses a similar approach with Don Juan. He's already confronted him with his theory about Doña Ana without really getting anywhere, but he wants to know more about this fantasy about the duel with Don Alfonso that killed his father, the event that led to his vow to wear a mask for life.
Why are you so certain that your mother was not having an affair with Don Alfonso?
My mother was not having an affair.
It's never been clear to me what your mother meant when she cried out, "I will lose both of them."
My mother was not having an affair.
Do you understand why it's necessary?
Shut up!
Seems like he struck a nerve, doesn't it? Now let's take a closer look at what was going on inside of Alan up there in the loft with Jill.
I couldn't see her.
What do you mean?
Only him. Every time I kissed her, he was in the way. When I touched her, I felt him. I looked right at her and I couldn't do it. I wanted the foam off his neck. Not flesh, hide, horse hide. Then I couldn't even kiss her.
And he goes looking for Equus.
Friend. Equus the Merciful. Forgive me. Take me back. I'll never do it again, I swear, please.
What does he say?
I am yours and you are mine. I see you.
Now Dysart goes in for the kill.
Kiss anyone and I will see. Lie with anyone and I will see. You will see me and you will fail. The Lord thy God is a jealous God. Alan, he sees you. He sees you.
Eyes, white eyes all round, eyes like flames coming. God sees, my God has seen. No more Equus.
And this is where he does the deed.
Nothing!
And with this, it appears that Dr. Dysart has achieved his goal.
It's all over now, Alan. You'll go away now. You'll never see him again.
But how does Dysart feel about that? His old doubts are creeping in.
I mean, look at him. My desire might be to make of this boy an ardent husband, a worshipper of abstract and unifying God. My achievement, however, is more likely to make a ghost. Hopefully, he feel nothing at his fork but approved flesh. I doubt, however, with much passion. You won't gallop anymore, Alan. You will, however, be without pain.
Not only has he removed Alan's obsession, but he's also taken away his God.
Can you think of anything worse one can do to somebody than to take away their worship?
So tragic and yet so necessary, because the God that got to him in the end was the jealous and punishing God of the Old Testament, God the Father, if you will, who wanted to take away not just this one night with this one girl, but all hope of ever finding another, much in the same way that his own father had already taken away everything that had ever really mattered to him. While Jack never uses hypnosis on Don Juan, he does finally convince him to take medication after that last confrontation. And just as the hypnosis took away Alan's God, the medication seems to have taken something out of Don Juan as well. Here he is post-medication at a hearing with the judge and the other doctors.
I was born in In Queens. Me and my parents moved to Phoenix when I was a kid.
The mask, although removed by force 10 days earlier, is beginning to loosen its psychological grasp on him as well.
When I was 16, my father was killed in a car accident just outside of town.
In other words, the fatal duel that had inspired his delusion never actually happened. So, why the delusion?
My mother, she'd been having these affairs, and my father knew.
Hence the need to create such a legendary love story out of his parents' relationship. The one remnant of truth in his story was that his mother actually did feel guilty enough to become a nun and go off to a Mexican convent, leaving him to fend for himself at the tender age of 16. But what about his beloved Doñana? Was she real?
So one day I was looking at this magazine, and there was a centerfold.
And from there, things went pretty much the way Jack had described it in their previous session. He managed to track her down, but she called him a creep and hung up, leading to his public suicide attempt, dressed as Don Juan, the world's greatest lover. A classic case of overcompensation.
I just decided that my life was over, so I was going to kill myself.
But was he really going to go through with it?
Or at least I was going to make people believe that I would kill myself. I never really had any intention of killing myself.
Is this what really happened, or did he adapt Jack's interpretation just to get out of the hospital?
Oh, look, you want me to tell you some crazy story like my grandmother so you will think I am sane. If that is what it takes for me to get out of this place, I will be happy to do it.
We'll never know. But how did our two psychiatrists fare after curing their patients? We know they both had doubts. Let's peek in on Dr. Dysart now. What about that passion that he found so alluring? What did it mean to him?
I'm talking about passion. Do you know what that word meant originally? Suffering. The way you get your own spirit through your own suffering.
And once he's brought Alan through his crisis.
And now he's gone off to rest, leaving me alone with Equus. I can hear the creature's voice. He's calling me out of the black cave of the psyche. And now, for me, it never stops. The voice of Equus out of the cave. You see, I'm lost.
Doesn't seem like a very happy ending for him. He almost seems to need this suffering in order to feel alive. Does it make him any happier? And what about Alan? Is it really better to have loved and lost than to never have loved at all? Let me know what you think in the comments. And as for Jack, look at his face as Don Juan is telling his story. He doesn't look very happy either. It's almost as if he needs to hold on to Don Juan's illusion, because, you see, he'd been weaving his own myth together all along.
And you, my friend, who are you?
I'm Don Octavio de Flores, married to the beautiful Donna Lucita, the light of my life. And you, my friend, you have seen through all of my masks.
And he keeps the legend going.
My name is Don Octavio de Flores. I am the world's greatest psychiatrist. I have cured over 1,000 patients.
And with his wife and last patient in tow, he heads off to the island of Eros, where Don Juan may or may not have found his Doñana waiting for him on the beach as she'd promised. As Jack says, why not? Both of our psychiatrists have, to some extent, taken on the delusions of their patients in spite of having drawn the patients themselves back to reality. Dysart has fallen into Alan's delusion completely and into the depths of despair, but without the passion. I somehow doubt that he'll find his own spirit through his suffering. Jack, on the other hand, has not literally taken on Don Juan's delusion, but only the spirit of it. He's chosen to look beyond what his eyes show him and seek out the beauty in life. And I think he's not so much retiring as starting over on his way to happily ever after with the love of his life. At which of these two altars would you prefer to worship? Let me know in the comments. And I hope you'll join us next time as we explore love in the Casbah and discover the cinematic origins of that hopelessly romantic skunk, Pepe Le Pew. Be sure to hit the bell notification button so you don't miss it. See you then!